Robert Bly's Snowbanks North of the House is a particularly haunting little poem. You'll notice that the language is incredibly straightforward, and that's proof that this poem was written in 1981 and not at a later time. Over the course of the 20th century, American poetry in many ways sort of diverged along a couple different lines, one of them towards things that were more esoteric, conceptual, and difficult, the other side of things being maybe a little bit more straightforward than they had been in the past. So this poem is an example of something that doesn't really mess around. It sort of gets to the point. It's a poem of desperation, a poem of loss, a poem of failure. Robert Bly himself is somebody who has established a reputation as sort of a modern-day wise man of sorts. He is somebody who's done a lot of translation. He's brought a lot of works into English for the first time. He also wrote the best-selling book Iron John, which is a book-length myth specifically about the situation of being a man in the world today. So he's a notable person. This poem in and of itself is something that raises a lot of mortal questions as to how we go about life and, the things that happen that aren't good and how we necessarily deal with those things. It's it's amazing in that it's both on one hand a picture of one single family falling to pieces. The boy getting out of high school and stops reading. He stops calling home. The mother doesn't make any more bread. The wife doesn't, love the husband anymore. Then obviously the son dies. So this is, a very terrible image of one family. But then also at the same point, you can look at each and every one of those statements not as an example of individuals in a family, but as just individual archetypes in and of themselves. Like, singularly, the boy gets out of high school and reads no more books. That in and of itself is an archetypal suffering. The idea of the wife looking at her husband one night at a party and loves him no more. All of these things can be seen as archetypal events, even to the point that even the moon is moving through the unattached heavens alone, all by itself. That stuff all brings us, though, to the complicated ending of this poem. It's from a book called The Man in the Black Coat Turns. So this image here at the end is definitely key. So some questions come up. Who is the man in the black coat? Obviously the immediate thing to jump to is that he's death. But that does make for a good idea. The man in the black coat turns and goes back down the hill. No one knows why he came. So it could be death, but it could also be doom. It is kind of a mystery, but in one way or another, the man in the black coat does represent the sort of, darkness and misery and aloneness that can happen in our lives. But the thing is that it asks, why did he come? So in a, more cosmic sense, you could say that this whole entire issue of why did the man in the black coat come can be related to the inquiry of, why is there evil in the world? Why do bad things happen to good people? And in this case, why didn't the man in the black coat finish climbing the hill? It's all very sort of difficult and allegorical, and it's something that you need to sort of, think your way through on your own and sort of discover and comprehend your own interpretation of what the man in the black coat represents. But no matter how you cut it, it's a starkly unforgiving and touching work. It really sort of hits hard, and it's something that, the sadness in it is a thing that if it hasn't affected you, you haven't yet really read the poem. The second poem we're going to talk about now is one that's a little bit more lighthearted, but still, in its own right, kind of a serious, sort of twisted, dark work. Alcatraz, written in 1987 by Sharon Olds. Sharon Olds is a great narrative vein writer. Her poems tend to be more straightforward stories. She doesn't, mess around with a bunch of, sort of stylistic convention. She just sort of tells the tale as it is. This piece of work obviously is about a girl and her irrational fear, the irrational fears of children in general. That whole entire idea that a little kid could honestly think that if she spills her milk, that she's going to be sent off to prison. It does have some interesting conventions in it, such as the first line, "When I was a girl, I knew I was a man." I think this is a great example of an effective line break, because if it just said, "When I was a girl, I knew I was a man because they might send me to Alcatraz," you lose something there. But by just making it, "When I was a girl, I knew I was a man," it forces you to consider and comprehend the complexities of the idea of "when I was a girl, I knew I was a man" in and of itself before you move on to the next line. Also, we get some interesting repetitions here. "White as a white shark in the shark-rich bay, the bars like milk-white ribs." You hear that rhythm there? There's something very beautiful about it. I'd see it there. "White as a white shark in the shark-rich bay, the bars like milk-white ribs." It definitely has a rhythm to it, and that's one thing that a lot of good poetry will have. It'll have a musicality that you don't necessarily get in prose. Some other things later on in this work that we get the circle of sky around the earth, circle of land around the bay, circle of water around the island, circle of sharks on the shore, circle of outer walls, inner walls, iron girders, steel bars, circle of my cell around me. So again, wonderful rhythm, but also that sort of interesting holonic idea of things constantly being within circles, sort of like how maybe right now, there's wherever you're sitting, and wherever you're sitting, there's a decent chance that it's in a building, and that building is in a city, and that city is in a state, that is in a country, that is part of the earth, that is part of the solar system, that is part of the universe. This sort of whole entire notion that, the complexity goes all the way up and all the way down. So there are some other things going on here, such as the question of, at the end, it says, "The glass of milk and the guard's eyes upon me as I reach out for it." So it sort of brings up that idea of being watched for what our next mistake be, and raises the question of, is this poem just about the irrational fears of children, or is it possible that we are all the one who is about to spill the milk? Is Alcatraz really all of our lives in this situation, where we are all sort of together in this issue of, constantly being watched by the universe, waiting for our next mistake, waiting for our fates to be decided?